which is generating order ID using the UUID, and then
Yeah.
I have a ID list
क्या बोल रहा है?
which I am
Yeah.
taking input of the customer.
हाँ डेंटिस्ट से करवा
Sure.
के
Actually, we
दांत
had talked
दांत में
about product
वो
list
तो
here, but
निकलवा
that's
दिया
okay.
दांत
Yeah.
जो सड़ गया था।
Okay, okay. I think I missed that. Okay.
Yeah. Fair.
So
Yeah.
उसने
that's,
बोला
and
कि
then
खाना गरम नहीं
using
खाना है, खाना
application class
हार्ड
to
नहीं खाना है,
orchestrate the
दूसरा
order
ऐसा ही।
creation.
Sure. So if we go to cart service dot checkout cart,
Yeah.
हाँ इसमें भी
just
इन्होंने
one thing
टुकड़ा
here,
दिया
can
था
we
तो
say
अभी
cart
8
dot
घंटे बाद
checkout
निकाल दिया
and
उसने।
let state be handled internally?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I think that makes sense.
और वो
We
बोल रहा
can do
उसमें
that
कुछ
refactoring.
इम्प्लांट
You
करो
can
एक मिनट से दूसरा
update
वो
cart state
दांत
rename to
नकली
the
वाला लग गया।
checkout method
Right.
and
बोले क्या
pass
है
any
कि बहुत सारे
parameter.
दांत इनके गायब
Right.
हैं,
Right.
एक इधर दूसरी
Cool.
साइड
So yeah, this looks good. So you have created a domain
तो बोले
service
ये दांत
basically
के दो
which
दांत निकल गए हैं, एक तो और खराब है
and a
करके।
cart just updates its state and then
मतलब टोटल
order
4 दांतों
creation
में
is
से
the
एक साइड का एक
responsibility
तो
of
पहले
cart
निकल, दूसरी
domain
साइड का
service.
एक और निकल गया।
Yeah.
तो दोनों
Okay,
साइड अब
sure.
एक एक
Yeah,
दांत
checkout
बचे
service
दाढ़
or
वाले
something like that.
दबाने
Yeah,
के।
fair enough. Yeah, this looks good. Any comments, folks, on this?
तो वही बोल रहे हैं नकली इम्प्लांट वाला कर देंगे।
Shobit, I think you can open that class. Yeah, if people have some comment on that.
Sure. Sure. Yeah.
So we
हाँ
also
कैपिंग
followed a
का बोल रहा था
similar
वो जो
construct
एक
where we
साइड कैपिंग हो
created
जाएगी, इस वाले
checkout
में
service
इम्प्लांट
as
होगा।
another domain
कैपिंग में
service
बोल रहा
and
है
did the
दो
same.
दांत के बीच में एक मिसिंग
Okay,
है तो उसमें
cool.
फिर कैपिंग
Any
करेंगे।
solution without domain
तो
service?
लेकिन वो क्या है कि जो दांत साला अच्छा है ना वो
Yeah,
उसको भी
we
छोटा करके
basically
कैप
put
पहना
everything in the order class.
मैंने बोला फिर वो आप
Let's
छोटा
look at
कर
the
दो
code,
उस
yeah.
दांत को जो चल रहा है अभी।
Okay.
वो दिक्कत और है।
Yeah. So this is what we did. It is like create, and it takes the
नहीं
card.
बेच बोल रहा है
Yeah.
बेच बनाएगा दो
Basically
दांत के
checks
बीच
if
में
it's
एक
empty
गायब
or
है
not, and
तो
then
बोले दो दांत को
throws an
छोटा
exception.
करना
But
पड़ेगा
otherwise,
एक ब्रिज बनाएगा
it
और
will
फिर आप
basically
दांत किसको
add the
बोले तो
products
बचेगा
in, and then create return a new order, and then it also checks out the cart,
फिर रूट
and
कैनाल बोल
basically
रहे
we
थे
are
हम
setting the this to empty in the checkout.
Okay, so the order is taking a cart
ये
and then
बहुत
we are
डर
basically,
रही
okay,
थी।
got it. And then you are returning the order and delegating cart dot checkout. So if you go to line 27, yeah,
नहीं
cart
चले
dot
जाओ
checkout.
कुछ नहीं। लेकिन बिल्कुल
So
दर्द नहीं
it's
होगा।
emptying the collection and probably going to set the status at checked out.
Yeah, we did not get to the status yet. Right now, like we
Yeah.
did just only the items,
नहीं
the
नहीं
emptying
करवा
the
लो और
items.
क्या घुटने का भी
Okay,
यहाँ
fair
पे
enough.
बेंगलोर में।
Two solutions. Is there a solution where someone created order in the method of cart checkout?
Yeah, I
So let's look at that solution also.
नहीं दांत में क्या बोल रहा था कि यदि आपके कोई सड़न
Yeah,
होती है ना
so
तो सड़न आपकी नसों के
actually I had a checkout method.
Yeah,
वो बैक्टीरिया
this is on a cart, right? Cart dot checkout.
Yeah,
बोले
yeah.
वो डर तो बोले दांत में सड़न नहीं
Sure.
होगी
And then we are
और
returning
मालूम दिन
order.
में
for you.
ब्रश करने के लिए रात में करना
Cool.
ज्यादा
So I think we saw three variations
रात
of
में रात
it,
में आप एक
and
बार खाने के बाद कुल्ला तो करना ही है पानी
we are
से
going
और
to learn a
सोने से
new
पहले
concept about
आप
aggregate and then
एटलीस्ट
come
ब्रश
back
कर
to
लो
this
या फिर
discussion,
टंकी
right?
में वो
Like
पानी का कुल्ला तो करो
because it's all about trade-offs, right? And which one is better in a particular situation and why is
नहीं
what
रात
we
में
are
ज्यादा
looking at.
जरूरी भले ही सुबह मत करो आप
So when we learn aggregates and then when we come back to this code
या
and
तो
ask ourselves a
ले
question,
आओ या वो आयोडीन वाला जो
what
भी
should
आता
we
है ना कार्बन
choose and why, hopefully we'll have better answers because right now there are three answers and we don't know whether using domain service is better or the third solution is better, card creating order or order creating card, the second solution. So we will kind of try to answer those questions. But to understand the main concept, we have to solve one code problem, and this time we are going away from e-commerce domain. We are going into bank domain. Again, same thing, right? This is a cooked up use case, so this is nothing to do with the real life and banks. Intentionally, I am putting some things there so that we can learn concepts. So, like intentionally the code problem may not really well aligned to our actual needs. But let me put that in a chat window and then so inside your domain package you can create a new package called as bank and solve this code problems there so that you don't have to create all together different repository. like to explain a concept. I did not have good example in e-commerce, the code example. That's why we're changing domain to a banking domain.
अरे क्या
So we are
करना,
going to
तो
solve now a
गाड़ी
code
चल के
problem
बढ़िया
10.
सर्विसिंग करवा चुके हैं।
And again, lot of things are given to you. You just have to what is entity, what is value object is given. The last line is what we are interested in, that we're changing customer's address from, let's say, old city to new city.
अब क्या बाई क्या कर रही है, बाई भी यहाँ पे नाटक
Right?
कर रही है।
We are
क्या
going to
बिल्डिंग
give
में रेट
it
बढ़ा देंगे,
12
सब लोग
minutes so
2,500
that you
दे
can
दें।
think about it.
तो मुझे पैसे दे दो, सब लोग
And
बढ़ा दिया, तो खुद ही से बाकी
again,
क्या-
I'll
यहाँ
again
नहीं
say
आती,
this,
बोले कि
that
मैं तबीयत खराब है, ये
if you
बाकी
can do
लोग
things
काम करके
without
चले
domain
जाते हैं।
service, do that, right? If a data is available as a member variables, then don't try to enforce the domain
और
service.
सोच रहे हैं
Domain
अभी
services are
ये
needed only
नीति
when
बोल रही थी, इससे
you
तो
cannot naturally
बर्तन मारने वाली
fit
मशीन
things
भी ले
into entities, right? So try to think of that. Can you fit naturally in
अरे
entity?
ये इतना ही पैसे लग रहे हैं, 2,500
If
ले
yes,
रहे, 6
then
महीने
don't
में
create
खर्चे
domain
निकल रहे हैं,
service.
और
If
लोग
you
बोल
know,
रहे हैं
don't
बहुत
create
अच्छा
a
साफ
domain
करती
service.
हो। वॉशिंग मशीन जैसे
So
डाल
this
दो,
example is in Zoom chat,
झाड़ू पोंछे के लिए रख रहे हैं।
and we are going to open breakout rooms for 12 minutes.
अरे तो क्या उसमें सब साफ हो जाता है ऐसे कपड़े जैसे वॉशिंग में। अब यूएस जैसे ही होने वाला है। नहीं तो क्योंकि अब ये लोग बहुत डरा रहे हैं, क्योंकि आप तुम नहीं दोगे ना तो कोई और देगा। वो एक अंकल का वीडियो था ना, ये लोग अपनी मर्जी से गांव चले जा रहे हैं, अपनी मर्जी से। अब पहले नहीं आप उनको चिल्ला के बोल सकते कि यहाँ झाड़ू नहीं लगाई, वहाँ नहीं, वो बोल देंगे आप किसी और को आएगा। नहीं अब रेट बढ़ रहे हैं इंडिया में, सब जगह बढ़ रहे हैं। क्योंकि उनके पास डिमांड, उनके सप्लाई बहुत कम है और डिमांड बहुत हो रही है ना, सबको करवाना है। और बाकी लोग देने के लिए तैयार हैं, जो जो 2-2 लोग काम कर रहे हैं, ये कर रहे हैं, तो वो कुछ भी दे दे रहा है। 5,000 रुपये दे दिए साले। एक तो ये बगल में कोई मलयाली लोग साले कहीं ना कोई ऑफिस जाते हैं, 2-2 महीने के लिए घर की चाबी दे रखी है उस भाई को, और पता नहीं घर में रहते हैं, फिर वो घर में खुद आके पता नहीं कर देती, बोल रही थी भैया गए अभी एक दीदी 2 महीने। साले रह का को रहे गाँव में, केरल वेरल में घर रहता है, इनका कुछ काम नहीं करते, बढ़िया से घर में वो रहता है इन लोगों को। तो इस साला का अनाप शनाप पैसा ऐसा रहता है। रामेश्वरम की थी वो तो। रामेश्वरम भी था वहाँ। अब देखते हैं कल जा पाएंगे कि नहीं, वैसे मौसम और अब चंदा मौसी लोगों को क्या हो गया? अरे एक कोई लैंडिंग वेंडिंग की कंपनी का वो सोच रहे थे रजिस्टर करने का। उसमें लैंडिंग मतलब कि कर्जा लेन देन, गिरवी और कर्जा वाला, जिसमें अभी काम कर रहे हैं ऐसे पिरामल में। मतलब इसमें क्या रहता है, लोगों को ऐसे लोन पे पैसा दो एक से लेके दूसरे को, ऐसे बैंक अपने को 6% पे दे रहे हैं लोग। वसूलने के लिए सिक्योर्ड लोन होता है और एक अनसिक्योर्ड होता है। सिक्योर्ड में ये है कि जैसे मान लो आपको ऑटो खरीदने के लिए, आप गाड़ी खरीदने के लिए लोन ले रहे हो, तो गाड़ी का जैसे आपसे डॉक्यूमेंट साइन करवा लेंगे, जैसे आपके प्रॉपर्टी डॉक्यूमेंट होते हैं एक नोटराइज पेपर में कि इसकी इतनी EMI रहेगी, आपको मंथली दोगे और नहीं दोगे तो ये गाड़ी आपकी इसमें कंपनी बेच सकती है या उसको ओन ले जा सकती है। जैसे घर का हो गया, घर में एज ए बिल्डर का आप होम लोन दे रहे हो, ऑटो लोन, ये सब सिक्योर्ड हो गए। अनसिक्योर्ड में ये होता है 10-20 हज़ार 50 हज़ार वाले लोन, जैसे किसी को मोबाइल फ़ोन खरीदना हो, कम कुछ फ्रिज टीवी खरीदना, आजकल गांव वाले लोग ले रहे हैं टायर 2-3 सिटी वाले लोन ले लेके फ्रिज टीवी के लिए अप्लाई कर रहे हैं। जैसे LCD टीवी उनको चाहिए तो बोले गांव वाले लोन ले रहे हैं 50 हज़ार का और फिर वो चुकाते रहते हैं। तो अनसिक्योर्ड में ज़्यादा कुछ नहीं, वो धमकाने वाले एजेंट आते हैं लेकिन वो कुछ कर नहीं सकते। नहीं तो आप सिक्योर्ड लोन दो ना। दूसरा सिक्योर्ड लोन ये होता है कि गोल्ड ज्वेलरी के अगेंस्ट, जैसे मान लो किसी उनसे रखवा लो तो वो सब फिर आप एक एजेंट रहेगा, वो जाके उसमें लिख देगा इतनी वैल्यू है उसकी, या उसके घर के अगेंस्ट उसकी जो चीजें हैं उसके अगेंस्ट लोन दे दो। उसके घर जैसे मान लो जहाँ रहता है उसके पास गाड़ी वाड़ी तो होगी, उसके अगेंस्ट लोन दे दो उसमें। हाँ तो वो जनरल थोड़ा बहुत चेक तो करना पड़ता है वो सब, लेकिन फिर कम पैसा दो लोन उसमें, ये भी कर सकते हो। लेकिन अब आने वाले दिनों में यही सब तो बहुत कमा रहे हैं ना ये लोग। तो वो तो बढ़ेगी ना, वो उस YouTube वीडियो में वो जितनी भी लोअर क्लास वाली सर्विस है वो सारी महंगी होने वाली। जैसे आपकी मेड, टीवी एंटीना फिट करने वाले, वायरिंग करने वाले, प्लम्बिंग, ये सब जो, हाँ सैनिटाइजर और ये सब पेट कंट्रोल, ये सब महंगे होने वाले हैं। और इनके पास डिमांड भी बहुत है इनकी, क्योंकि जैसे मान लो 1000 लोग हैं, ये लोग आज आप नहीं दोगे तो दूसरे उनको, लेकिन अपन जैसे नौकरी वाले, अपने पास तो लिमिटेड नौकरियां हैं, इनके पास डिमांड बहुत है इनकी। तो इसलिए क्या हो रहा है आजकल ये लोग अपने रेट बढ़ाते जा रहे हैं, पहले नहीं था। विजिट का वो तो है ही, इनके यहाँ पे वो एंटीना हिल गया था, 300 रुपये उसने आने का लिया, 100-200 रुपये वो करना। ये बढ़ेंगे ही ना, अब US टाइप यही हो जाएगा, क्योंकि वहाँ पे अब जो मिडिल क्लास है वो ये सब सर्विस नहीं अवेल कर सकते, केवल अमीर लोग कर सकते हैं अब ये सब। जिनके पास पैसा हो वही मेड रख पाएगा, वही कुक रख पाएगा आने वाले सालों में। वो अर्बन क्लैप है वो रखते हैं उसमें, फिर उसमें वही है, आप उनको मैनेज करो। फिर मान लो एक वो उनका एम्प्लॉय चला गया, फिर दूसरा प्रोवाइड करो उसके लिए।
ज्वाइन करने का बोल रहा है।
आई नो, वो इसलिए बोल रहा हूँ कि अपन लोग इसमें एक आदमी ढूंढना है जो केयर टेकर की तरह फैमिली वाला हो, ठीक है। तो धीरे से क्या है उसको अपन आधार सेंटर या पानी सप्लाई के काम में रखेंगे, और उसकी वाइफ है वो काम वाली की तरह उसको उसमें रख लिया, उसको रहने का फ्री पड़ गया, और उससे अपने घर की भी वहाँ पे वो होती रहेगी। वो इसलिए क्या यही दिमाग लगाते हैं यहाँ पे। वही रहता है इन लोगों को। अरे तो ट्रैक्टर की एजेंसी उसने जो लेबर रखे होंगे दुकान के, वो घर पे बुला लेता होगा काम करवाने। अरे ये छोटी जगह के लोग मालूम 10 लाख रुपए साल का हो गया ना 15 लाख, तो इनको बहुत है। और ये टैक्स तो 0 अंडा देते हैं गवर्नमेंट। तो 15 लाख आपको छोटी जगह पे मान लो एक 5 ट्रैक्टर बिक गए, तो 2-2 लाख रुपए हर एक में कमा लिया इनने। नहीं तो वो उसका जो डिस्ट्रीब्यूटर के उसके एम्प्लॉय होंगे ना वो दुकान के, वो बुलाता होगा उसमें। हाँ तो एजेंसी में काम करने वालों को बुला रहा होगा ना वो। वो रख लेते हैं ना डीलर वाले, जैसे एक आपका शो की गाड़ी रहती है, वो कोई खरीदता नहीं, तो वो कंपनी खुद ही आपको बोल देती है और लिखवा देते हैं कि खराब हो गई, ये हो गई, डेमो गाड़ियां जो रहती हैं, तो वो कहीं से खरीदते रहते हैं। गाड़ियां तो अब आजकल सेकंड हैंड भी मिल रही हैं, लेकिन हाँ तो वो तो आप वैसे भी ले सकते हो। क्या ये आईटी से रिलेटेड धंधे में ये है कि आपका पैसा ज्यादा, मतलब रनिंग वनिंग कॉस्ट ज्यादा नहीं होगी। एक बार धंधा चल रहा है ऑनलाइन चलता रहेगा। बाकी सब में अपन कर सकते हैं, लेकिन वो क्या केवल बिजनेस रहेंगे। ये क्या है कि एक कंपनी जैसा हो सकता है। जैसे अब पानी सप्लाई है, अब पानी सप्लाई कल को नया आदमी आ जाएगा, उसमें अपन कुछ नहीं कर सकते। वही इसलिए क्या है कि इतना आजकल धंधा केवल ऑनलाइन ही चल पाएगा जिसमें कुछ ग्रोथ का स्कोप हो। अभी एक कंपनी वाले बोल रहे, जिंदल वाले हायरिंग के लिए बोल रहे हैं, वो लोग सरिया स्टील बेचेंगे पूरे इंडिया वाइड ऑनलाइन पोर्टल बनाने के लिए। उसके लिए हायरिंग करने के लिए ऐसे इंटरव्यू दिया था जिंदल वाले, तो उनको भी क्या है लोन वोन, तो ये सब क्या है जैसे जीजाजी टाइप के लोग हैं, 30-40 साल से कुछ ग्रो नहीं कर पाए ना ये लोग। तो वो ये सब कंपनियां अब जो बेंगलोर की हैं, वो अब इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर और कंस्ट्रक्शन में भी कूद रही हैं। वो तो निकलेगी कल को। वही मैं बोल रहा हूँ, या तो फिर धंधे जो खोलना है ना आपको ऐसे देखने पड़ेंगे जो हमेशा चले, जैसे नाई की दुकान वाला धंधा, या फिर धोबी की दुकान, या फिर पानी सप्लाई। इसमें क्या बड़े लोग नहीं कूदने वाले। इसमें क्या होगा, जैसे मान लो आप 2-3-4 वॉशिंग मशीन खरीद लो, एक आदमी को बिठा दो प्रेस करने के लिए और वॉशिंग कपड़े। हाँ तो इसमें कोई बड़ा आदमी नहीं कूदेगा। उस एरिया के जितने होंगे, आपको यहाँ पे ये इतनी रिक्वेस्ट आती है जैसे कपड़े, क्योंकि क्या हो रहा है जैसे जो यंग लोग हैं के रेंटल वाले, वो वॉशिंग मशीन टीवी कौन ले, तो वो यूएस टाइप वहाँ पे कपड़े धुलवाने आ जाते। या फिर एक आदमी वहाँ सागर लैंडमार्क से वो बोरी में कपड़े भर के ले आया और ड्राई क्लीन प्रेस करके आपको दे दी।
Those documents, everyone should be here. Okay, awesome. So would someone like to show what they have done? You can walk through the things you're thinking. That's fine.
नहीं
Yeah, maybe we can share.
Yeah.
अरे वो सब के लिए लैंडिंग वेंडिंग का काम करो। वेब3 की कंपनियां बाहर चल रही, इंडिया में नहीं चल पा।
So we had created 3 classes, one for account, one for customer, and one for analyst.
Okay.
इसलिए या तो मैंने एक सोचा था कि उसमें
Side
एक
account we
आदमी
have
को रख
just
के
address and
पानी
a method
सप्लाई
to
कर
create
सकते हैं,
address.
तो फिर वॉशिंग मशीन
And in
4-5
customer we have
की
like a
सेकंड हैंड
list of
खरीद के
bank accounts
एक आदमी से बिल्डिंग वालों को कपड़े
and
धुलवा के
address
प्रेस
and
करवा के
one more
भिजवाने
method
का
update
आदमी
address. Inside update address we are also calling the update method of all the bank accounts.
अरे धीरे धीरे लोग
Okay.
कम रहेगा, धीरे धीरे बढ़ती
So bank
है। आप
accounts
सर्विस
for
दोगे
each,
ना,
and you are calling the update
तो
address.
अब घर में लोग
Yes.
जैसे जो हैं वो आने लग
Yeah,
जाएंगे,
this
उनको पता
looks
चल रहा है यहाँ
good.
पे कपड़े धोने का भी हो रहा है,
Anyone
ड्राई
has
क्लीनिंग भी
any
हो रहा है।
suggestions on this?
अभी
Any
क्या लोग का
questions?
मेंटेन है कि यहाँ केवल ड्राई क्लीन होता
No domain
है,
service, right? It's simple.
तो उनको जब पता चलेगा वॉशिंग भी हो रहा है तो अपने कपड़े ले
And
आएंगे
you have
बाइक वाले।
program.cs which is calling this.
Correct.
यूएस में तो आदमी की भी जरूरत नहीं रहती,
Nice.
वहाँ वॉशिंग मशीन रहती है, वहाँ जाओ खुद से पैसे डालो और अपना धो के खुद ही
Awesome.
निकाल के ले आओ।
Does a solution for others
ये सब
similar,
बोलते
or
क्या
you have
है,
something
जिनमें
different
बड़े
that
लोग
you
नहीं
can
कूदेंगे।
showcase actually?
या तो इस टाइप के धंधे चालू करने पड़ेंगे छोटे।
Yeah, it's the same.
Similar?
So Sandeep, we could not complete it, but the idea was to create a map of customer ID to address, because address was getting replicated in two places. One was the account and the customer side. So update can happen on the customer class, let's say customer.update address, and it will update that map of customer ID to address mapping. And in the bank account, we can have a get address behavior which fetches from the same map based on the customer ID.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, yeah, real life scenarios could be different, but we are as I said, intentionally trying to code it like this because we want to learn something. So that's why address is duplicated at both the places. But yeah, your point is fair. Anyone tried domain service, or everyone was able to fit behavior on entity?
We tried it. Let me just show you. I'm not sure if it
Okay.
completely fits the picture. So this is application update address where we input the customer and address, and some customer's address is updating here, but there is another class which address manager we can say, and here they are updating address for the accounts.
Yeah, but this method can directly also be coded inside the custom
Correct.
class, right? Like there isn't much happening in address of manager.
Correct, correct. Yes.
Cool. Yeah. So given that, then we can go with the first solution, right? Which was showcased, and maybe I will quickly showcase, and then we are going to look at what aggregate means and how it connects to microservice. So I'm going to open my solution, 1 second. I hope you're not hearing any background noise. There's some loud sound in background. Hope Zoom is filtering that. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. No,
Yes.
background noise.
Good. Yeah. So there's a customer, and customer has UID because it's an entity. It has an address as a city. So very simple. And customer has list of account. Account is an entity, and it has UID and it has address. So same class, address class. And I think as first pair did, there is a update, ignore the comments for now. There is a update address which takes the address. This is on a customer class, updates its own address and delegates to account for updating the account address. Just as I have kept this method as protected because you don't want someone to directly call account.update address method. Then accounts update address would get updated, but the customer would have old address, right? And that's not what we want, because we have to make sure that this business rule is always followed, the one which is highlighted. So we can't break that. That's the business rule or invariant which we have. So to understand what aggregates are, the entity becomes aggregate. We're going to look at, we're going to take little bit of detour and try to look at what database transaction means and try to apply that to entity. So anytime you're not following, please stop, and I can repeat the contents. These are not that easy. Aggregate as a concept is not that easy to explain. So let's see how we do on this. Yeah, so we solve this, and all of us are familiar with database transaction, right? Relational database transaction has a property called as ACID: atomicity, consistency, isolation, and durability. In order to understand domain-driven design aggregates, what we are going to do is we are going to take this ACID properties of a transaction, and then we are going to look at it and apply it to entity basically. So we know cart is an entity, so we'll see how we can apply this ACID properties logically. So we all know database transaction and ACID properties, right? They are actually the physical properties of it. What we are doing is we are trying to take that concept and logically apply it to the cart. So not in a transaction context, we are not talking about database transaction and literally applying it to entity. We are taking database transaction, try to understand what that concept is and how we can interpret in context of a entity logically. So what does atomicity means? Atomicity means if I was writing something to database, it either happens fully or nothing happens, right? Like it is never in intermediate state. If we take atomicity and apply it to a cart, say that you are adding 2 quantity of apple pencil to a cart, then either both quantities should get added or nothing should happen. It should not happen that one got added and one did not get added, right? So that's the atomicity applied to a cart entity, example of that. A consistency is a transaction does not corrupt the existing data, so that I'm updating one record, then other records should stay safe as is, right, in a database. That's the consistency. How do we apply that in case of cart? Basically, each method on a cart should follow all business rules. What that means is, say that there is a business rule which says the total price of a cart should always reflect the items in a cart. What that means is, whenever add item finishes, we have to update the total price to consider new price, additional price. Whenever we remove a quantity whenever we remove the apple pencil from a cart, then cart price should be reduced, total price, so that it reflects that. So what's happening is, each method in your cart entity has to make sure that all business rules are followed and they are consistent all the time. The cart is consistent all the time. Isolation is when you have 2 different threads or 2 different places trying to modify a same cart. And there are isolation levels like transaction read committed, transaction read uncommitted, serializable. We won't go into details of that, but we can assume that we're not going to let user modify a same cart from 2 places. And if we come into that situation, we can use optimistic locking and all those things. So assume that I is given to us, we don't have to worry about it. And D is very simple, right? When your Java process dies or .NET process dies, you know how to write that data into disk or databases or file system, so that when a process comes back up, it can read data from a disk. So that's the durability property. So someone else is taking care of durability, and isolation we don't have to worry. Then what last line says is, when we apply logically atomicity and consistency to an entity, it becomes an aggregate. It can say that, yeah, I can take responsibility, more responsibility, and I can become an aggregate. So how would this look in case of we apply this to our example of customer and account? So customer is kind of saying, I'm going to upgrade myself from entity to aggregate. And then if you see what are the reasons for it, first of all, it's managing a value object, address value object. Customer is also managing account, and in turn it's managing the address of the account also, right? So it's a nested object where a customer entity manages address and an account entity. And if you ask account, are you an aggregate? It would say no, because I'm managed by account. I'm managed by a customer entity. So account still stays as an entity. It's not changing it to aggregate so far. Other thing customer would say, oh, by the way, I take care of atomicity and consistency because I will make sure this business rule is always followed. I would ensure that no one accesses the bank account directly. If they want to do anything with bank account, they should come through me, right? Like in this case, update address is happening, the delegation is happening through customers. Someone can call update address of a customer, but they cannot call the update address on the account because it's a package protected. So someone outside this domain package will not be directly able to say account.update address. Now to achieve atomicity and consistency, say line 62 was successful and 63 was running, and then there were two accounts. One of the account, line 64 went through fine, but for the second account, line 64 basically threw an exception, right? There was an exception because let's say there's some problem with validation. Now, if we look at what's happening in memory, we have this updated in memory and one of account updated in memory, but other one has failed, right? What that means is, if we're looking at how things are inside the process right now, not yet saved to database, we have already broken this business rule, right? We have broken the consistency, and that's not good, right? Business won't be happy about that.
Hello.
And to satisfy that, one solution is
Who is it?
the this particular method can take help of a transaction, right?
How did you get this
we are
number?
inside a domain package, so we can't start a transaction here ourselves. But think of this
I know
method is
it,
running under
updated
transaction, some
anywhere.
logical transaction was started by someone else. Now what would happen? Who is that someone else? So that someone else happens to be application. So think of application, a client sitting outside as a application service in layered architecture or adapter in hexagonal. And what it is doing, it's starting a new database transaction, say like a Spring Transaction Manager, and we'll see actual microservice code for this in some time. This is a pseudo code right now. So we are saying customer.update address. Now say for some reason, and this is running under transaction, so say that line 64 throw an exception. If it throws an exception, then it would come here and we're going to roll back the entire transaction and discard the customer object, which is dirty, and it would be then garbage collected. That means as if nothing happened, right? And if everything was successful, then we're going to commit the transaction basically. And Spring annotation for transactional would automatically do for us in application service, so we'll see how. But right now, like logically think that this method is, this method is running under logical transaction here. Why it's running? Because it can take care of atomicity and consistency by using a database transaction. So it's using a database transaction. If line 55 throws exception, anything in line 55 inside this method throws an exception, even if 62 throws an exception for some reason, you can always roll back the entire thing basically. So as if nothing happened. So that's the concept of the aggregate basically. You're defining a boundary. Let me cover a couple more slides from a book, and maybe then that might help answering some of your questions. So going back to slides again. So this is what book talks about, right? Objects have life cycles. We know that cart has a life cycle. What's a challenge? Challenge is maintaining the integrity and invariant. That means maintaining the business rule throughout the life cycle. Whenever each method is called on the object, the life cycles, the business rules should be all taken care of. What aggregate is doing, it's just defining a clear ownership and boundaries, right? What was the boundary in this case? Customer aggregate said, I will take care of my own address, and I'll also take care of account and its own accounts addresses. So that's why it's defining that boundary and ownership, right? So aggregate is a cluster of associated objects that we treat as a unit, right? So within an aggregate, it's always a strong consistency. And aggregate and aggregate root are similar thing. Here, both of them happen to be customer, and customer has a customer ID which can be globally identified. The other objects inside the aggregate can have local identifier. What that means is, let me type something here. So you may have customer, and these are the identities of the object, right? So you may have customer with ID 1, which has account with ID 1. And then there is another customer which has a global identifier or identity of 2, but it also has account with ID 1. So these two here, account ID 1 are local identifiers. They are not global, right? You would say that they are colliding with each other, but that's okay, because when I say account ID 1, I can always qualify, oh, by the way, I meant with customer 1's account ID. And even if this account number is same as customer 1's account ID, I can still differentiate because there is a global identifier associated. And when I expose only customer ID and ID 1 and ID 2, which is global identifiers outside. And I'm going to hide these identifiers inside that aggregate, right? And that's what this exactly saying basically. What you're reading here, it's about what I was trying to explain. And this we talked about, right? After each transaction or when each method completes, right? Read this as each method completion. You have to make sure all business rules are followed, right? Business rule in this case, what cart total price should match with sum of all items in a cart when add and remove happens. Let's see what are next slides. Yeah, so let me go back to code to see if people have any questions on aggregate. Or I can stay on these slides actually. And whatever we explained, right, atomicity and consistency applied to entity. Now there's a book called, not book, but there's a paper called as, I typed that in the chat. So understanding aggregates, right? You can refer to one of the thing which is, and this is referred, the book which I will be sharing, it's there mentioned there already. It's a paper by Pat Helen. And what Pat calls as entity you can read as an aggregate, and what he calls as message you can read it as domain event. And if you read that paper, you start understanding why aggregates are needed, why we are taking entity to and trying to differentiate whether a particular entity is aggregate or not. And if you see, account is still not an aggregate, right? Account is happily, it was an entity and it has stayed as an entity. The main reason it's managed by account customer, so it has no choice but to stay as an entity because its life cycle is managed by customer aggregate.
बहुत कबूतर भी हैं कमीने.
So I'll take a pause to see if there are any questions. Share these slides again.
So you mentioned that there's a logical transaction, right? Like the Spring,
Yeah.
we use some sort of like Spring transaction or something. So we cannot achieve the aggregate without using any transactionality.
Yeah, because it's a strong consistency and everything has to be very strongly consistent, like all business would follow. So it's a logical concept, right? Aggregate itself is a logical concept, and we are using, like, we are not literally applying a transaction to it, but we're trying to apply like atomicity and consistency, those concepts logically to make sense of it basically as an aggregate.
So basically, usually when we do it, like we update address or update a customer, and then we have to save it in the database.
Yeah.
Then like maybe after saving it in the database, maybe you are setting the status to something else. Like suppose if you take the cart and the order example, you create an order, let's say you save the order, and then you change the status of the cart as checked out.
Yeah.
And both are separate, separate tables. Right? And
Yeah, so whether you are doing it in same transaction or different transaction.
Okay, then you mean like if whatever domain operations are there and also database operations, they'll all be in one transaction.
Yeah. Think of that. Any method you are doing, if that method is writing in end, it's going to write to two tables in database, or you are going to and in one transaction, then that aggregate boundary is basically that big, right? That transaction, because it's spanning across two tables. So think of that way. If you are creating two different transactions, then you are splitting the transaction boundary. So if you have two different transactions, then one may succeed and one may fail, right? So that means you do not have strong consistency there. What database guarantees you, ACID transaction guarantees you, is that strong consistency, right? Even if you write to a 10 table, if you write in one transaction, then you are guaranteed that either it happens or nothing happens with all those 10 tables. Aggregate is saying same thing, only thing is it's doing that in memory. Think of it, it's doing that in memory. Like in memory, you are saying, I want these nested object always consistent. If they're consistent in memory, then I know that someone else would take care of saving them in database in consistent way. So in this case, what we are saying is, when I change a customer address in memory, I want to also ensure all account addresses for that customer are changed successfully in memory. And that's the concept of aggregate. Now, someone would guarantee me that if it is across two tables, they would take care, run it in ACID transaction, one database transaction, so that it all happens or nothing happens. So what you're kind of doing is you're taking the ACID transaction concept and trying to apply it to entity in memory basically, and see if it's validating those rules.
Oh, got it.
So yeah, I know it's not an easy concept, but think of, and that's why I said read that paper also. So dots would start connecting. So think of a database transaction. Sometimes you do a transaction across multiple tables because you want to make sure it writes to all. Say there are two tables, right? One is credit table and one is debit table. And you want to ensure when I credit, I also want to mark debit. Otherwise, I would be inconsistent if I just update one of them. And that's why you have that in a transaction. And transaction ACID properties guarantees that yes, either both of that happens or nothing happens. And it would roll back transaction if one of the thing fails. Now you take that concept of a database transaction, atomicity and consistency, and apply that to an entity in memory. And if that method on that, each method on that entity adheres to atomicity and consistency in memory, then you kind of can call that object as an aggregate, because it is exhibiting a behavior of strong consistency and making sure all business rules are followed. Yeah, Shivir, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think you covered it pretty well. So what I have to say is, at any point in time, right? I mean, if you take your entity as such, and since he spoke about aggregate, right? I think he's also going to speak about aggregate root, where you cannot directly act on something without the permission of an entity. In the sense, you might have a set of entities that are actually belonging to the aggregate, right? You see the cart, you have the cart item, you have the product, you have the price. All of these are objects. But again, there is a structure. So you operate on at the cart level, right? To add an item, remove an item, and all these things. So, as he said, right? I mean, to simplify it, at any point in time, the data should be consistent. The data should be meaningful. Say if you take a person, as I gave the example of addresses of the person, right? A person has a collection of addresses. Say from 2010 to 12 I lived in US, and then 12 to 16 I lived in Chennai, and then from 16 to 20 I lived in Bangalore, right? And present I am living again in Chennai. I cannot have two current addresses, meaning that start date and end date of the address collection, the address entity in that addresses collection should be there, right? The data should be consistent, meaning I can only be at a given place at a given point in time. You get what I'm saying? From a business rule perspective, I cannot, as a person, be in two places. I'm not omnipresent. I should be there in only one place in time and space coordinates. So when you take that into account, right? That is the consistency that you want to ensure in the data. So if you want to ensure this in the data, right? It can be any storage mechanism. Say for example, in RDBMS, you're going to write into two tables. Let's say if you maintain that in a MongoDB document, where the document you are trying to minimize the impedance mismatch. You have a single document where you maintain the parent and child or the relationship or in a single collection, right? The document is the level of your consistency. So you're going to, the atomicity operates at the document level. You're going to write a document or read a document, something like that in Mongo, right? So in essence, at all times, the data that is persistent should be meaningful. The data that is in memory should be meaningful. And that meaningfulness is nothing but your business conditions and invariants that should be fulfilled at all times. Any operation you do. So there's going to be some data that's going to live in memory, and that's going to differ from your database based on the last time when it was written or updated, right? You'll be doing something with the data. Before that, if somebody writes to that particular store, then whatever you have done in memory becomes invalidated. So you should again refresh the data set and then see, again, all of these are application, the way the business users want the application to behave, right? Whether they want you to merge the data with the changes that have come there, or whether they want the user to get an option to merge this data to make it consistent, or you just discard your changes and you redo it. All of these are different cases of aggregates, right? Sandeep, I mean, you want to add something? Does it make sense?
Yeah, I think, yeah, that's good. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think that this helps. Yeah. So do read like beyond distributed transaction. That would start connecting some things. It took some time for me to understand aggregates. I think once you make connections with, basically read that paper, and we are going to cover some more topics. Maybe like a lot of dots would connect for you.
Just one tip, folks. After Sandeep's session, right, if you get to read, I mean, definitely you need to read the book, that is for sure, right? You read, I mean, it's not like a novel or something where you read in a flow and you just go, right? You read a concept, try to take some notes around it, absorb it, think through it, and then move to the next concept. Because even if there is one book in my life where I've read it multiple times, every time you read, you get a different perspective, you get more understanding, you get more clarity. You go, I didn't connect this last time, probably this is how it is. This is what he means from this, right? I mean, Eric, I mean. So, yeah. The more you read it, the more you absorb and think through it, right? You will get to understand it more and you will connect the dots. Basically, this book has connections to Patterns of Enterprise Application Architecture, which is a book by Martin Fowler. It has connection to refactoring and object-oriented design, right? It has connections to the way the different architectural patterns are outlined. It has connections to microservices and micro frontends. So this is one book that has stood the test of time because this like ages. I mean, I would even be happy to say that this book has got its due respect much late in time. It should have got its respect much ahead of time. But only after the industry started embracing microservices and micro frontends in the last decade, right? This book has got more traction and more readership, in my view. Right, Sandeep? I mean, you can correct me.
Yeah, I think book was ahead of its time in 2003. That's how I look at it. I mean, what Eric was thinking was, I mean, it was ahead of its time. At that time, it probably wasn't the right time. But now, I think, as you say, yes, the microservices, data mesh, micro frontend, team topologies, architectures. I mean, everything just connects. And for a person as opinionated, for as like me on a DDD being very opinionated, I see unfortunately everything through DDD lens, and I see things much simpler. I think that things are much simpler. We try to make some things complicated.
Yeah, same here, Sandeep. I mean, it's mostly the inherent complexity of the domain can be very well handled using domain-driven design. But due to our lack of knowledge, we add the accidental complexity and complicate the problems and make them difficult for everyone. So, anyways, that was my 2 cents. Thank you, folks.
Cool, thanks. So just a time check, we are at 4:48. Let's take 10 minutes break and we'll continue on this topic. Maybe in these 10 minutes you may have more questions on aggregates.